Everyone, and welcome back to another book review. Now, I know I'm very late to the party. I know I'm like 5 years late to the party, but today I'm going to be reviewing A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I know, how have I lived this long without reading the book, especially because it's been popular for so long and I read so much, but here we are. I had not read the book up to this point, despite having several recommendations from friends and family members, and I decided, because I had a long drive ahead of me, that I was going to listen to the audiobook and finally see what all the hype was about. So, relevant information, I did listen to this via audiobook, so I don't really have anything to show you. So I did listen to this over the course of a drive, and I did like it because I felt like I could talk back to the main characters and kind of tell the main character when I thought she was being dumb, but I did think the audiobook was a nice version and the reader did a really nice job with it, but that is how I listened to it, so maybe some aspect of listening to it affected the way that I felt about the book. So let's dive into my thoughts. I'm not going to belabor the plot because at this point everyone and their mother has reviewed this book. I do not usually follow other people's reviews, mostly because I don't want other people's opinions to necessarily influence my opinion when I'm reviewing books or when I'm thinking about books, but I don't live under a rock. I've definitely heard about this, seen about this, and I have friends and family members who are readers and will share their thoughts and opinions with me, so I was a little familiar with it. I knew it was fantasy, I knew there was a romance element. That was basically all I knew going into this book, but I knew that everyone had been reviewing this book. I also noticed this trend in books where a book will get really, really popular, and then it almost flips and then it becomes popular to hate the book. So I feel like I saw a long rise or a rise of people talking about how much they liked this book, and then there was a flip, and then all of a sudden it was really cool to hate the book. And I feel like that happens when any book gets too popular, and I don't really like that trend either because I feel like you shouldn't, I feel like some of the hype is just, I want to be different, so I'm going to hate the book. I don't know, maybe it's just my algorithm that's feeding me all this stuff, so I don't really know. Maybe the algorithm said, hey, she didn't click on any of the videos of reviews of people liking the book, so maybe she'll click on videos of her hating the book. And also, I read somewhere that negative titles tend to get more clicks and stuff online, so maybe that has something to do with it too. Someone's like, if I have a negative review because I didn't like the book, then I'm going to get more views than someone who's talking about a book that they genuinely enjoy. So I don't really know why. That's just something that I see and I noticed happened with this book, but I didn't really see much else about this, so I went in relatively blind. So everyone knows the plot, but let's talk about my thoughts and feelings about this book. For the first half of the book that I was listening to it, I was thinking, cool, standard fantasy. We had the obvious love interest between the main character, whose name is it Feyre? I couldn't quite catch if it was Feyre or Feyre, so I'm just gonna say Feyre, and she gets taken away to the High Fae kingdom, I think it's called Prithia. One thing I did notice is 4 sentences into the book, the main character, the narrator, the point of view that we have says, no one goes to Prithia unless they have a death wish. And I was like, we're going to Prithia. I don't know anything about this book, but I know that we're going to Prithia because of that sentence. So I kind of knew we were going there. And yeah, she gets taken away and then she falls in love with her captor. She doesn't get totally kidnapped, as I'm sure you know. It's kind of like a life for a life exchange because she accidentally wound up killing someone who wound up being Fae, and due to this treaty between the humans and the Fae, she has to take his place and live out her life in Prithia. And yeah, there's this cycle that goes on for the first half of the book where she's told not to do something, she does it anyways, she needs to be rescued from a bad situation, she's really confused as to how she got herself put in this situation, oh no, and that just happens a couple of times. And at this point in the book, about halfway through the book, I felt like it was just standard fantasy. The romance was very predictable and ho-hum, but while I wasn't sold on the romance, there was enough fantasy elements going on that I was like, okay, I'm still here, I'm still listening to it. And honestly, at this point, I couldn't see the hype about the book. I didn't really understand why it was viewed as so great. It felt like any other generic fantasy that I could pull off the shelf, so it was still kind of on the fence about it. My sister did say book 2 got better, so I was holding on. I definitely wanted to read at least through book 2 because I did trust my sister's suggestion on this, but at this point I don't want to say I wasn't impressed. I would say it was like a 3-star read. Just very generic, very there, and I wasn't really feeling the romance. Then, about halfway through the book, around the point where she has to wind up going to the under the mountain kingdom with the Queen Amarantha, I believe was her name, That's where the book kind of shifted up to a 4.5 star book for me, because I felt like the plot became way more interesting. All of a sudden, characters that you thought were bad were just characters who were making the best choices in a limited set of bad choices that they had available to them. And I think we got introduced to a lot more characters. Things moved beyond just the generic, oh no, I'm trapped here and now I fell in love with the high fae that I'm gonna spend the rest of my life in this garden with. Like, the plot advanced a little bit more, and there were some serious problems and serious bad guys. But again, all the bad guys weren't just being bad because they were bad people. I feel like even the main bad guy, the queen, the Amarantha woman, had some compelling reasons, in the sense that you could tell, or you knew kind of why she had the anger that she had, and why she maybe was acting out in the ways that she was acting out, which I liked. I like it when the bad guy has a compelling reason that isn't just, I'm a bad guy. I like that, and I thought that was well done. And at this point, I was like, the fantasy is really selling me, and I really like the plot itself. The romance up to this point was still ho-hum. Not feeling the romance, but because there was enough other fantasy elements, I was enjoying the book. So we're at 4.5 stars. I made it to the end of the book, and I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking, the main love interest, the high fae who Feyre falls for, is named Tamlin. Tamlin is the least interesting man in this book. What does Tamlin have going for him other than the fact that he is attractive? And I also feel like he has a little bit of an ulterior motive to trying to woo her over, or win her over, to woo her, to win her over. And despite the fact that he did not entirely force her, and the fact that he did kind of back off from making her love him, he's a boring character, or at least he's the least interesting man out of our options. So out of the, in my opinion, options that our main character has available to her for romance, we have Tamlin, who is just kind of there and boring and attractive. Then we have Lucien, who's kind of the witty sidekick character who definitely has a dark past. I think he would be interesting. I at least find his dialogue and his character a lot more compelling and interesting than Tamlin. I liked it when Lucien had screen time. I didn't really care if Tamlin had screen time or page time. I don't know what to call it in a book. So Lucien was already the better of the two, and there was a third character who was introduced. Initially, he was introduced, I think, when they were still like in Tamlin's castle, but then he became more of a factor when they went underground to Amarantha's kingdom, and that was, is it Reese? I'm struggling. It started with an R. I think it was Reese. Reesend. He's this other character who initially, upon introduction, you think he's kind of a bad guy, but of course, like everyone else, you learn that he's just making do with the best. He's making the best choice given the circumstances that he has, and I like Reese. I think he is the most interesting character. He is kind of, well, I don't know if he's a bad character. I like him. And I also think he's a more interesting character and a more interesting potential romantic partner for our main character than Tamlin, and probably even more than Lucien. But Lucien and Reese, or Reesend, are the two more interesting characters out of the three that have been introduced to us. So I really hope the story goes in that direction, because I'm really ho-hum on the main romance character. The fantasy plot was interesting. The fantasy plot's really what's carrying this story forward for me, and I really hope that the story veers in the direction of a more interesting love connection in this book. The other minor thing I just wanted to touch on before I ended this video, I figured out the riddle the moment the riddle was read, and maybe that had something to do with the way the narrator read it, but my sister and my aunt both said they figured out the riddle the moment they read it in the print version too. Amarantha gives this riddle that if the main character solves, she will immediately be free with the love of her life, and I immediately knew the answer to it, but it took the main character many months or weeks, I don't really know what the time frame was when she was underground, to solve it, and she solved it at the very last minute. But I felt like the answer to the riddle was very obvious, but I don't know, maybe I just had a lot of time to think about when I was on my ride listening to the audiobook. So overall, I would give this a 4 to 4.5 star. I really enjoyed the plot, and I think the plot is what's driving this forward. I'm interested to see what book 2 is going to be about, because I feel like some things were, or a lot of it was wrapped up neatly in book 1, but I'm interested in seeing how it goes forward. I don't know if book 2 is going to be more driven by the romance or if there's going to be an additional element of plot that's going to be brought forward, but I want to see what this is all about, and I'm going to keep reading the series. So that was my review of this book. I'm sure people have thoughts on this book, but if you have anything you would like to share, please leave it in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.